Okay, here we go. I'll open the chat. So, well, welcome everyone. If people are joining, could you pop into the chat and say hello and let us know where you're from? We've got a few minutes. We're a little bit early, so we might give people a little bit of time to join. But yeah, if you're here, let me know in the chat where you're joining us from. Let me know a little bit about your design, maybe your energy type. Hi, Andrea from Melbourne. Hello, 4/6 mental projector. Oh, you're a mental projector. Amazing. Hello, Gizem from Turkey. Hello, 3/5 emotional manifester. Beautiful, welcome. It must be, oh no, it must be more, I'm assuming it's maybe morning for you in Turkey. Hello, welcome to the people joining. We've just got a few minutes until we start, so I've asked everyone just to come in and say hello. Say hello, let me know where you're joining from. Hi, we've got, oh, Estonia. Amazing. Let me know your energy type. Let me know your profile and what you guys could start doing, because we're going to be talking about Mercury tonight. You could make sure you have your human design chart in front of you. And also, if you can, on one of the websites, look up your Rave Mandala chart. So what we want to be able to also find is what zodiac sign your Mercuries are in. You can see that on Genetic Matrix, on Maya Mechanics, and on my website, my constellation, we show it as well. But we're going to dive into the zodiac signs of your conscious and unconscious Mercuries as well. Okay. Hi to everyone joining. Come in, say hello, let me know a little bit about your design. I'll start getting the page ready. Here we go. Okay. Open the things. Okay. Okay, if you've just joined, please use the chat. I love these to be interactive. Tell me a little bit about your design. Tell me where you're joining us from, and we'll get started in a few minutes. Five one mental projector from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Hello, Stephanie. Kadri, Manny Jen, 2/4 emotional. Hello. Hi. Linska, hi from New Zealand. MG13, just looking up placements. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so what we want to know, everyone, what we'll be talking about is your Mercury in your human design chart, but also in your just the zodiac signs. You don't have to worry about the houses or anything like that. Hi, beautiful. Hi, Jane. Is a HD chart enough? Yeah, so it would be helpful because I am going to talk about the signs, Stephanie. So if you can't find it now, you can just sort of take note of what we talk about, and then you might be able to find it later. But they do show the zodiac sign of your Mercury placement in on Genetic Matrix. Maya Mechanics show it, and my website, myconstellation.com.au, we show it as well in the Rave Mandala view. Yeah, so if you're able to look it up with one of those, otherwise you can look it up at a later time. Hello, we've got a few more people joining. If you haven't, let me know where you're from. Let me know a little bit about your design. Yes, on Genetic Matrix, it's in the Astro view. What is it? I think it's like Natal Astro view, where you select like all the drop down of like foundation charts. It's in there. Yeah. Beautiful. Okay, well, it's almost time. We'll just give everyone one more minute because we've started just a little bit early. You've got it. Okay, beautiful. Oh. Joining from Singapore, 4/6 generator, Mercury in 43.6 Scorpio. Oh, I love that. Love it, Jane. Thank you. Again, if you've just come in, please say hi. Let me know where you're joining in from and let me know a little bit about your design. And if you want to start looking up your Mercury, that would be helpful. Oh yeah, thank you, Algus. You can generate mandala chart here. Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so we'll get started. So again, let me know in the chat. So who's done any like exploration of their Mercury? Let me know if you have dived into this from any perspective, whether it's astrology or human design before. Sonia, hi. Joining from Lennox, New South Wales, 4/6 splenic manifestor, Mercury in Virgo. But which side do I check, left or right? So we're going to actually look at both, Sonia. That's what I want to go through. So we do want to check your conscious Mercury and your unconscious Mercury. Mark, hi, I'm a reflector from the Netherlands. Oh, beautiful. We have a few people from the Netherlands. Yes, from a HD. Yep, I've dove in from HD and Jinkies. Yeah, beautiful. Okay. So we'll just start with like an overview of Mercury. So hi Wendy, thanks for being here. So Mercury in astrology is a really important planet. He's the closest planet to the sun, and so he represents how a person thinks and then how they express what they think, right? So when we're looking at Mercury, we get a really good idea of like, what's this person's thought process going to be like? How are they going to perceive the world around them? What kind of thinker are they? What kind of intellectual are they? And then how do they actually like express those thoughts that they're having? And so he's a really important signifier of your message and the how and the what of your message, right? We can get a really good sense of like, the what, like what you're likely to be sharing, what's likely to be more kind of natural and intuitive and flowy for you to share. And then also like the how, like how do you express yourself? How do you make people feel when you're expressing yourself? How does your sort of voice translate? And what we want to do is look at your conscious personality Mercury paired with your unconscious design Mercury. And what I found for a lot of people, it's actually the design Mercury, starting to get really like intimate with that can be like the big kind of breakthrough in someone's messaging, right? I think we're often a lot more, as we know, consciously aware, right? We're consciously aware of our personality planetary placements. They're typically parts of ourselves that we know all about. And then, through our process of deconditioning, what we're doing is kind of unlocking all the unconscious parts of our chart, right? And so, yeah, we want to look at both of those tonight. So if you haven't done so already, please get your human design chart. I want to look at your Mercury in your human design chart. We want to find specifically the gate and the line activations. And then we want to be able to see your Mercury in the Rave Mandala so that you can see what zodiac signs you have your Mercury in. I kind of just want to preface this by saying, like, please don't let this become a mental process though, right? Like, this is the whole thing with human design, is that it's a system for embodiment, right? It's a system for embodiment. And we really, when it comes to our messaging and communication and our marketing, we want that to emerge really naturally and organically through our body, through our authority, through our definition, right? We don't want it to become this mental process. And this is what can happen. You know, sometimes if we dive into these deeper layers of our chart too soon, we start to sort of intellectualize it, right? And then we don't actually live it and embody it. So always come back to strategy and authority. Always come back to allowing this, right, to move through you. But what we want to do is educate ourselves on our chart, because that kind of wakes up, you know, that wakes us up to the qualities and the gifts and the things like that that we have. So your invitation today is really just to contemplate, like just contemplate what we talk about, right? You don't need to like intellectualize it. You don't need to sort of mentally engineer things to match this, right? Ideally, the more you live your design, these qualities will just kind of naturally come through you. And so, like I started to say, oh, probably just saw my screensaver there with my dog. Mercury. So Mercury is the closest planet to the sun, right? So he has a very special relationship with the sun in astrology. And if you know about the sun, you know the sun is our life force. In the Gene Keys, the sun is our external work in the world, and it's our brand. And so Mercury being the closest planet to the sun, he's the fastest moving planet in the zodiac, which says a lot about, you know, the qualities of his energy. But from our perspective on Earth, he's also always within 28 degrees of your sun placement. So the sun and Mercury kind of travel quite close together through the zodiac. And so he's always within those 28 degrees, right? So it's really common for people to have their Mercury in the same sign as their sun. If he's not in the same sign, he's in the next sign over, right? But he won't be further than that, because each zodiac sign's 30 degrees. So he's always kind of in the sign of your sun or in the next sign over. So there's a real kind of like connection, right, that Mercury has to your sun placement. Hi, everyone joining. Hi from Scotland. Hi from Amsterdam, California, Spain. Beautiful. And so in the ancient mythology, I actually love the mythology around Mercury. So he was also known as Hermes, and he was the messenger of the gods. I really love, for the planets and for getting like an understanding of the planetary energy, I love referring to the mythology because I think it paints such a beautiful picture. But Mercury was really cool. Like, he was the god who could kind of flip between the different realms, right? Like, he could be with Zeus in Olympus, and then he could be down in the underworld with Hades, right? And actually in the mythology, he was responsible for walking with the souls, taking them down to Hades, right? He had a real, there was actually a real kind of non-binary nature to Mercury, like when you read the mythology, and he was cheeky, right? He was cheeky and mischievous as well. But he was quick. And there was, you know, the one thing I feel with Mercury is there can be this really beautiful quality. Like, if you picture that, like going to the heavens with Zeus and then going deep down into the underworld with Hades, like this ability to kind of, you know, walk with the gods, you know, be up in the sky, be up connected to like possibilities and things like that. And then also go deep down into the depths of hell, right? And deep down into the darkness. And so I often just describe Mercury as having this beautiful kind of like divine neutrality, right? This messenger of divine neutrality. But he's a really, interesting, the mythology is really interesting if anyone wants to go deeper. I think Mercury and Pluto, Hades are the most interesting to me. And so what I'm going to invite you to consider tonight specifically is the zodiac sign. And what we're mostly going to talk about is just the element, because I know a lot of people are newer to astrology. So I will talk about the different signs, but if you're brand new to astrology, like just focus on the element, which will be either fire, earth, air, or water. And then we want to consider as well just the line activation, right? So I can see a few people here are putting in the gates like 29.4. Just focus on the 4 for tonight. 28.2, just focus on the 2, right? Because what I find when it comes to your message, I actually find that for most people, the gate is way too specific. I think your message is so much more like overarching, and it can encompass so much more than what the gate description is. I do recommend if you've been in your human design experiment for a while, I definitely, think it can be worthwhile listening to the gene key of the gate, and particularly listening to like the evolution of the shadow to the gift to the city. Like that can be really beautiful. And I think, the thing I love about the gene keys is they add so much more depth to the gates. And I find they offer a really beautiful kind of soulful, more feminized experience with the gates. But I'm mostly going to focus on the line because, to be honest, in my client work, these are the things I found to be the most like immediately impactful and useful. And like I said, the gate can be super, super specific. And it's not always that you have to engineer your message to be centered around that exact one thing, right? I really think, like I was saying before, when it comes to your messaging and your marketing and your communication, it's more about surrendering to your strategy and authority and allowing that to emerge through you organically, right? Allowing whatever it is that's alive in you to kind of be expressed moment to moment. So yeah, but you can, if anyone wants to, you can go deeper. Like you can absolutely consider like the circuitry of your Mercury placements. That can be interesting. Even the energy center of your Mercury placements. But yeah, tonight we're really going to focus on these 2 things so that you've got some kind of actionable things you can walk away with without it being too overwhelming. And now how these work. So the zodiac signs, they really flavor the way a planet expresses for you, right? So the sign is like it infuses its qualities in the planet, right? So we all have Mercury somewhere in our conscious and our unconscious charts, but the way that we think and express ourselves is really different depending on what energy of the zodiac sign is being infused there. So that will flavor how you consciously and unconsciously express. And then we have the qualities of the lines, right? And I think they're really interesting to look at with Mercury because they also will flavor how you express. They'll also kind of flavor this role that you fulfill through your expression. And I actually find the lines can be really interesting to play with when it comes to like your content and your messaging. Similar to what you would do with your profile, right? I think when it comes to content and wanting to brainstorm content ideas, the lines of your profile paired with the lines of your Mercury can be really interesting to explore. So yeah, I find the lines to be one of the most, interesting pieces. And so, yeah, if you haven't already, pop in the chat. So what zodiac signs do you have? What's your conscious Mercury sign and then your unconscious Mercury sign? And like I said, I find a lot of people can find like their unconscious Mercury sign really affirming. I think, again, consciously, we're all obviously more aware of our conscious Mercury sign usually. And so kind of liberating, bringing awareness to and liberating that unconscious sign can be really, really affirming for people. But we can, if we're focusing just on the elements, right? So even I invite you just to think about like, what element is your conscious Mercury in versus what element is your unconscious Mercury in, right? And so if you have fire signs, the fire signs are Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. And what this indicates is the way you express, whether it's conscious or unconscious, and it's more just what emerges through your body. So Kinga, you can find the zodiac of your Mercury either on my website on myconstellation.com. You can find it on Genetic Matrix. You can find it on Maya Mechanics. And Algus actually linked it earlier on the Bodygraph charts page. Yeah. Yeah. So you can look it up there. But if you have fire around for your Mercury, right? So what we want to lean into with that, especially if your unconscious Mercury is a fire sign, what we really want to lean into there is passion. All of these fire themes, right? Passion, desires, self-assertion. You might find, you feel a little bit more even like self-focused or selfish with how you express and what you express, especially if you've got Aries there. The fire signs are all signs of gumption, or I like to think of as gumption. But with fire signs, what we see is more bold expression. We can tap into, usually there's more bravery, more courage, more inspiration, but, someone who speaks with kind of passion and authority. If you have Aries is definitely, typically Mercury and Aries people can be a little bit like shoot from the hip, right? Like there can be more of a quickness and a kind of wanting to use your voice to initiate and things like that. You have to be really careful if your Aries in, if your Mercury's in Aries and, you're initiating prematurely, right? You don't want to forget your strategy and authority. But that's something you can really harness, right? Leaning into all of the ways you can bring more of that feeling of like desire, right? And I think especially inspiration, like Mercury and Aries can be really, really inspirational for people. If you have Leo, this is so much about creativity, right? Creativity, boldness, shining your light, like not holding yourself back, right? If you are a Mercury and Leo person, you can use your voice to really illuminate others. That's like the beautiful gift of Mercury and Leo. It's like the brighter I shine, the more I illuminate others. Leo's ruled by the sun in astrology. And if you think of the nature of the sun in our solar system, it's like the sun, it illuminates and provides life for all the planets in the solar system, right? Like the more the sun shines, the more the solar system benefits, the more illumination there is for others. And Mercury and Leo is usually just very creatively minded. Then if you have Mercury in Sagittarius is so much about like philosophy and broadening people's minds, right? Like leaning into the unknown, sharing wisdom, sharing like knowledge you've kind of gone out and you're bringing back, right? And I think of Mercury and Sagittarius as kind of like big educational teacher type energy. But if you have Mercury and Sagittarius, you want to think about like, how am I, again, inspiring people? How am I broadening people's minds? How am I opening people up maybe to new forms of awareness? And it's quite like, and even like conversations around like even like faith and things like that are very Sagittarian. Judith, it's in, Algus has linked it a few times. There is a link for Bodygraph charts, but you can also find it on Genetic Matrix, on Maya Mechanics, and on my website, myconstellation.com.au. Okay, so then the earth sign. So let me know if you have your Mercury in an earth sign now. So we have Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, where the fire signs are all about like inspiration and desires, passion, gumption, motivation. The earth signs are all about the 3D material world, right? The earth signs are all about balance and grounding and stability. They're typically all very interested in what's practical and what's tangible, right? And very connected to even themes around like business, money, materialism. So if you have your Mercury in earth signs, like there's always going to be, I find, like a pragmatic, practical kind of a way to you, right? And you do want to kind of focus on, your messaging and what you're communicating being kind of something that evokes grounding, that gives a sense of stability, that gives a sense of balance, right? You're probably going to be someone who thinks in a really pragmatic kind of earthly way. If you have your Mercury in Taurus, This is so much about like, Taurus is a fixed sign, right? So Mercury and Taurus people can be a little bit stubborn, but what you typically have is a mind that's quite determined, right? And that can be a really beautiful, beautiful thing. And, Taurus is all about quality, right? So if you have your Mercury in Taurus, your message is probably going to be, with any of the earth signs, your message is probably going to be a little bit more refined. It's less about quantity and it's more about quality, and if you're a Mercury in Taurus, like you can think about like what, your values really informing what you share, and how you express, but, communicating in a way that feels like you're adding value to the world will be really, really important if you're a Mercury in Taurus. And even like, I think with your messaging for Mercury and Taurus, like thinking of ways that you can evoke feelings of even like luxury. Taurus is definitely the sign that, it's really about quality, but I always describe Taurus as like a Taurian, like they won't be buying, the $30 sheets from Target. Like a Taurian is going to invest in the $400 linen sheets, right? That get softer with every wash. So I find Mercury and Taurus anyway, there can be a real sense of like sharing and communicating things that have longevity as well, but really thinking of like your marketing. I also think Taurus is one of like the signs of artistry as well, Taurus and Virgo. If you have Mercury in Virgo, please know that like, the gift of Virgo is also the artistry and the mastery, and that's really, really lovely. Your one thing to be mindful of if you're a Mercury in Virgo is not being too critical on yourself, just like good is better than perfect, or done is better than perfect, right? That's a big lesson if you're Mercury in Virgo. But you want to lean into like sharing words of like, how are your words healing, right? How are your words creating connection? And I think of Virgo as like the earth witch of the zodiac as well, right? And the naturopath of the zodiac. But there's a really beautiful like precision. I also refer to Virgo as the sculptor, right? So sometimes if you're a Mercury and Virgo person, you might be someone who like you write something for your messaging and your content and then you pull back, right? Like almost like a less is more kind of approach. Then if you have Mercury in Capricorn, Capricorn is like commonly referred to as the CEO sign of the zodiac, but I think the deeper kind of layer of Capricorn is that Capricorn is very intuitive. I think of Capricorn as like the wise matriarch, of the tribe. If you go back thousands of years, like the Capricorn energy would have been the wise, the elder, particularly the female elder. Capricorn is actually a feminine sign, but also very connected to like business, money, and materialism. So you might find if you're a Mercury in Capricorn that can kind of go two ways. Mercury Capricorn people can be very, very pragmatic, very like realist, and very sensible in what they want to communicate and express, and sensible in their messaging, but they can also be like highly intuitive and highly tapped in and highly mystical, right? So you might want to think about like where you kind of are on that spectrum. And then the air signs, right? So, I should have mentioned too, with Virgo, Mercury's really comfortable in Virgo, right? That's one of the places where he's really comfortable. I don't really believe that planets are necessarily like, in astrology, we talk about like detriment, where planets in certain signs might not be as comfortable. And I really think of that as like the planet is just functioning in a way that's least like their regular self, right? But they're still beautiful gifts and all of that, no matter what sign you have them in. Then the air signs. So Gemini, Libra, or Aquarius are the air signs. And so if you have either or both of your Mercuries in these signs, you want to lean into or just contemplate these themes around connection, ideas, curiosity, cultivating community, shared ideas, beauty, justice, and equality, right? Especially with Gemini, if you're a Mercury Gemini person like I am, You know, the gift of that is being incredibly curious. Like Mercury Gemini people, like they're the people you want to pull into a debate. You know, Mercury Gemini people, I think one thing that I feel like I've really done in my business is kind of amplify the perspective I have of, um, you know, being able to hold multiple truths at once, right? I mean, if you work in human design is a binary system. So we are literally kind of like holding binaries at once. But being open to multiple truths, multiple perspectives, you know, Mercury and Gemini at their best is very open-minded, and very curious. And so Mercury and Gemini is so much about like asking questions, you know, and positioning yourself in that way as someone who's a curious thinker, rather than, you know, someone who's like super fixed in their thinking or rigid or anything like that. Then we have Libra. So Libra is, you know, very connected to artistry and beauty, but Libra is also like very much about justice and equality and fairness, right? So if you have your Mercury in Libra, again, it can kind of go both of those ways. I know so many lawyers who have their Mercury in Libra, or one of their Mercuries in Libra, or just strong Libran energy in their chart. But bringing in, like if you're a Mercury in Libra, your aesthetics are going to be important. And you might find that a lot of your messaging is really connected to how you convey things through beauty, through images, through artistry, right? It might be less about your words and more about the visuals with Mercury and Libra. I would actually say that for Mercury and Pisces too. It can be about the visuals and the feeling. But yeah, also like using your voice, you know, speaking up about things to do with justice and equality, right? You know, typically Mercury and Libra people can be really, really gifted at things like mediation and diplomacy, you know, and someone who has like the ability to see, again, kind of all arguments, all sides, right? I often say, like, if Libra is like the judge, right? Libra is like the scales of justice, weighing things up to see what's fair, what's correct, what's not. Gemini would then be the lawyer who's getting into the debate, right? The debate about like who's right, who's wrong, defending their client. And then we have Aquarius. So if you have your Mercury in Aquarius, Aquarius is the sacred rebel of the zodiac. Aquarius is all about innovation, doing things differently, rebelling, uniqueness, right? So they're all like qualities that I think you want to really contemplate in yourself and express, you know, liberate, allow yourself to express that side of who you are. Because if you have your Mercury in Aquarius, you have the mind of a revolutionary, you know, and so you really want people to feel that in you, the way you see things differently, the way you express differently, where you see the world could innovate, right? Aquarius is really interesting because Aquarius is so much about like the individual expression, but it's also like really connected to the shared collective experience as well. So there's like a big humanitarian qualities to Mercury in Aquarius, right? So even though Mercury in Aquarius is quite individually minded and wants that individual expression, at the same time, they're really holding space for, but what's good for the collective, right? What's good for humanity. And then if you have the water signs, so if you have either of your Mercuries in Cancer, Scorpio, or Pisces, this is what I have. I have my conscious Mercury in Gemini, and then my unconscious Mercury's in Pisces. And so that was really affirming for me. I remember when I realized that. So if you have your Mercury in any of the water signs are all connected to these themes of intuition, emotional connection, flow, feelings. Like if you think of water, you know, the movement of water. We have spiritual and emotional healing. And I should also say spiritual and emotional support in different ways, and spiritual and emotional service in different ways. Very connected to nourishment, but it's like soul nourishment, right? Like physical nourishment would come through the earth signs, mental nourishment comes through the air signs, and that sort of spiritual nourishment, soul nourishment comes through the water signs. And yeah, themes around support. And so if you have your Mercury in Cancer, you know, Cancer is like the maternal energy of the zodiac. I always say Cancer is like the mama lion. You know, if we have Leo the lion, who they're next to each other, it goes Cancer, then Leo in the progression. You know, Leo's the lion kind of like sunning himself, right? And like, I'm going to shine brightly on this rock. Cancer's like the mama lion who is getting the food. She's doing the hunting, right? She's getting the resources. And if you touch one of her babies, she'll rip your head off. Like that to me is way more Cancerian than the description of the crab. But if you have your Mercury in Cancer, there's typically like a warmth that really wants to come through in your messaging and your communication, like a warmth, like a feeling of like care and friendliness. You know, you might find that you're really called to use your voice in service to other people. You might find you're called to kind of be someone who uses your voice to kind of support the people around you, provide nourishment in some way, provide feelings of comfort and even like stability and grounding as well with Cancer. Then if you have your Mercury in Scorpio, you really want to embrace your capacity to go deep with people, right? Like you might find with your Mercury in Scorpio, there's even like qualities of you maybe wanting to talk or share about things that are like the darker aspects of our humanity, things to do with human behavior, things to do with psychology. But the main thing, if you're a Mercury in Scorpio, like don't stay in the shallows, right? Like the most magnetic thing about you is going to be your capacity to go deeper with people, and walk those deeper realms with people, and also letting people feel your depth, right? The depth you've really cultivated. And I find Scorpio being fixed water too. There's often this really beautiful like sense of longevity with Mercury and Scorpio, right? Can also be a little bit stubborn as well in their thinking. And then we have Pisces. Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. So with Mercury and Pisces, like you want to embrace like artistry and imagination and even like a little bit of whimsy as well, right? And Mercury and Pisces is so much about like the soul, connecting with the unseen, sharing things to do with like your intuition and feelings and what you perceive beyond like the physical, right? And you might find as well, like you're really called to use your voice for like spiritual service or spiritual healing in some way. And so you want to think about this, right? And like I said, like just bringing awareness to your unconscious Mercury and that sign. And I'm also like, be curious. Like if this is a sign that you don't feel connected to at all, like it's important just to stay open and curious to this. I know for me, I felt very affirmed by my Mercury placements, but I know for me, when I first discovered my unconscious sun was in Aries, and that was really confronting for me because Aries was a sign I didn't feel super connected with. I have a lot of amazing Aries women in my life, like amazing Aries women, but it didn't feel that resonant for me. And the more I contemplate it and the more I lean into it, and really the more I like embody my design, and you know, really live from my authority and my body kind of leaning, the more I see that part of myself, like the more I see kind of the gumption, right? Kind of the gumption and the determination that comes with Aries. So like stay open if you're not feeling it, you know, straight away. Okay, and then what we want to kind of weave this in with, August, there's just in the Q&A section, I don't know if you can see that, they're just asking for the link to find the unconscious Mercury again. If you're able to put that in the chat, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, so let's look at the line. So just go and have a look. So you'll find this on your Human Design chart. And like I said before, I think the gate can be too specific. So you can definitely contemplate that on your own if you want to, but you really don't have to, I don't think. So the lines really describe to me, like, again, these themes that you'll kind of bring through naturally as you live your design through your messaging. And I really like these roles. So these have come from the gene keys, right? So thinking about the different roles that you'll have on the lines of your Mercury, and they'll likely be different. I think these can be really interesting to consider in like how you're positioning yourself in the market. And also considering this in context of your profile too, right? So like for me, I'm a 5/1 profile, but I have a second line Mercury and a sixth line Mercury. And I really feel, I feel the sixth line a lot, but I do feel like the naturalness of the second line there too. I don't think August is here still. I'll see if I can copy the link. Sorry, guys. There you go. So if you haven't got it, there's the link again. Okay, so if you have a first line, let me know in the chat if you have a first line Mercury. So if you have a first line Mercury, firstly, you have a mind, the first line is really connected to fear. And it's not about living a fearful life, right? Or you having a mind that's always going to be fearful. It's about you having a mind that's designed to eliminate fear, right? You have a mind that's designed to kind of see what's unknown and help eliminate get to the bottom of it, right? Like the first line is the investigator. The first line wants to get to the bottom to eliminate fear and create stability. I feel like the role with the first line is so much about like being the authority, right? Really letting people through your messaging and your marketing, and even like the indirect kind of marketing that you do, right? The things that you share where it's just you sharing you, right? Especially if you have a personal brand, like let people feel what you're getting to the bottom to. We want people to really see and view you as the authority. But no, like that sense of fear, if you do feel that, it's because you are meant to get to the bottom of things to kind of eliminate that fear, right? The first line is innately creative, right? That's the identified role of the first line, is like the creator and the creative, right? So, what I feel this, I don't have a Mercury in a first line, but my profile is, and I like massively identify as a creative. And sometimes I look at my work and I'm like, oh, people might not really think I'm a creative, but I think I'm a creative, right? And it's so coming from that first line kind of desire to be that. The beautiful thing about the first line, the thing that I love, is the openness. They're really here to kind of be a seeker and a wanderer, like WONDER, like someone who wonders, who thinks, who's curious, right? But what we really want people to see if you have a first line Mercury is like the substance that you have, right? So again, you'll kind of see some overlapping things. Like if you have that Mercury in Scorpio, we want people to feel this. And if you have Mercury in a first line, we want people to feel this, right? Don't stay in the shallows. Like, don't be afraid to go deep. And to be honest, if you have a Mercury in a first line or Mercury in Scorpio, you're probably going to need social media channels that allow you to go deep, right? And Instagram isn't really the place for that, unfortunately. You might find that you really need to create a podcast, or you really need to get on YouTube, or you really like need to start a Substack, right? Somewhere where you can, that allows you to go deep. And I find for Mercury and Scorpio and first line Mercury's, it's like the commodification of your depth can feel really uncomfortable. And having to like dumb down your depth can be really uncomfortable, right? So it's like, what I typically suggest is like, especially for social media, find a platform where you can give all of your depth, use that as your main channel, and then repurpose bits and pieces onto like your Instagram or your Pinterest or your Facebook, right? Like, but let the depth come through in whatever platform feels most natural for you. But we really want to position you as like the creator and the authority, right? Through your marketing, through your messaging and your positioning. Then if you have a second line Mercury, you might identify with these two if these are in your profile. So you can absolutely apply what I'm saying to yourself if you have these in your profile too. Then if you have a second line Mercury, this is, you know, the hermit, the natural, the guru, the genius. We really want people to feel like the ease. You know, we really want your messaging to kind of evoke that sense of ease and flow. There's a really beautiful discernment and tastefulness with the second line Mercury. Like you have a mind that's discerning and a mind that's tasteful. And it's very much connected to practicality. And the archetype of this one is the dancer, right? The dancer becomes the dance, which is gate 16, but, you know, I think it applies to this as well. So we really want to, if you have a second line Mercury, like be curious about, you know, the ways of expressing and the things that you want to talk about that do just kind of fly out of you, right? Like what are the things that you could just talk and express about? Because they're probably going to be part of what you are really here to share. Kinga, line 1, I've been avoiding taking the role of an authority figure. Yeah, so yeah, that's going to be interesting for you to explore, because that's what we really, what your chart really wants you to step into, right? And it can be that fear, you know. Then if you have a third line Mercury, you know, in traditional human design, it's the martyr. I tend to call the third lines the mad scientists, you know. I'm someone who's like dominant in third line, so I feel very identified with the third line process. But what you really want to lean into is your role as the changer, right? The third line is connected to desire and is very much about developmental change. How do we developmentally make things better? The third line is also always very connected to making money. What I find for third line Mercuries, like naturally third line Mercuries have a very resilient mind, right? You can be resilient, you can be resourceful, right? Which is a real gift, like a resourceful thinker. And that can be a part of how you position yourself as like, you know, everything's figure outable, right? I think of Marie Forleo a lot, and I don't know her chart, but I think of her a lot with the third line Mercury, because she says that it's like everything's figure outable. Like if I don't know, I just work it out, right? Like that's kind of a quality that you really want to like pay attention to. Mira, I actually suggest like pay attention to both, you know, and be curious about both. But I think typically it's the unconscious Mercury, like leaning into that and bringing more awareness to that, that usually unlocks something for people, right? Because the conscious Mercury, like we tend to see this more in ourselves, right? But letting that unconscious Mercury really start to shine can be really impactful. And so what I think when you're a third line Mercury though, is like really letting people into your trial and error process, right? Like you're the people, like we want your mistakes. You know, if you're a third line Mercury, your mistakes are gold for the people around you, right? Like if you can kind of process what you've moved through and share it from a place of like kind of wisdom, right? We want people to learn from what you've bumped into, you know. And if you're a third line Mercury, or your third line profile, you know, don't be afraid of sharing your raw humanity. You know, people typically, it's like people will really resonate with your story, like with you being really real, also with being a bit vulnerable too, right? Which is really tricky, because for the third line, you know, the shadow of the third line is shame. And so it's kind of your edge, right? Like typically there's a lot of shame around what you've experienced. And they teach in the Gene Keys, the medicine for that is learning to lean into vulnerability rather than avoid it, and to learn to laugh at yourself as well, right? But like a vulnerable, real, raw third line is so magnetic. But it can be the trickiest one, I think, to lean into. Then if you have a fourth line Mercury, you know, that's the opportunist, very much about, you know, the second level, but foundations. We have themes around connection, love and community, honesty. This heartfelt connection is always really important to me with fourth line Mercuries or fourth line profiles. I think what we really want is for people to feel your warmth, right? We want people to feel your warmth. We want them to feel like the friendliness, the compassion that you have. And know that if you have a fourth line Mercury, it's like you have a mind that can be really influential, right? The fourth line is the most influential. You have a mind that wants to externalize, and a mind that can be very influential amongst your community and your network. And you might find that you use your voice to connect others, right? And then the more that your network prospers, the more that you do as well, right? I just shared some reminders for fourth lines on my Instagram page, and one of them was about how, like, I'm going to butcher it, but it was about how, like, the best way to nourish your network is through generosity rather than from greed, right? So if you're a fourth line Mercury, it's like, how can I love and like connect with my community more, and how can I nourish and nurture my community more? Also, if you're a fourth line profile, and that really has the archetype of the server, right? So again, it's like nourish the network, and the network nourishes you. And let people feel the warmth, right? Let people feel and see the friendliness. Let people see, again, like the honesty as well, right? There is a rawness to fourth lines too, right? In a different way, like the third line is like, there's a vulnerable kind of rawness. With the fourth lines, to me, they always feel just like a no BS type rawness. And then if you have a fifth line Mercury, so you have the mind of a problem solver, right? Like the fifth line is all about solving problems and providing really practical solutions. You have to be very mindful. If you have a fifth line Mercury, you have a voice that can be very alluring and even seductive, right? But you really want to use your voice in a way you want to have practical things to offer, right? You can get into trouble when you're kind of, especially if this is in your profile too. I feel like the projection really mostly applies if you're a fifth line profile. You have to be so mindful of what you're projecting out and how you're seducing people. But you can really kind of lean into positioning yourself, if you're a fifth line Mercury, as, the fixer. Like, hey, I can see this is a problem. Here's my really tangible, practical solution for this, right? Also providing organization and using your voice for leadership too. The fifth line is all about universalizing, right? Universalizing, there's often like a connection to strangers of consequence, right? You might find that through your messaging and your marketing, you connect with people who are beyond the network, right? But yeah, really leaning into that leadership type role and the practical problem solver. Then if you have a sixth line Mercury, we have the role model. You again, depending on what phase you're in, there can be more of an aloofness, detachedness. But the real thing to lean into with this is teaching and education, right? And being more, using your voice and having, knowing you have the mind of someone who's really more of a visionary, right? And a visionary, a futurist, someone who's looking ahead, right? Who's potentially quite adept at being like someone who's overseeing things, there's a wisdom, right? But I think, you might want to just, again, contemplate. I find a lot of six lines don't like this role of the teacher, right? Like I think with six lines, it's like, most six lines, I think, identify as eternal students. So really embodying that teacher role can be a little bit uncomfortable. And the thing to know about being a teacher is it's not like literal and like you're going to sit people down in a classroom, right? Like it's like you teach through your embodiment. You teach through the way you live, and being like you really need to be the role model and the embodiment of what you're selling too when you're a sixth line, right? Catherine, the Bodygraph charts team will share the recording, I believe, afterwards. And then what you also want to think about with the lines of your Mercury is, is it a personal line that you have, if it's a 1 or 2 or a 3, or is it a transpersonal, right? And I've got these other kind of roles here as well that are a little bit more human design focused. The other roles I had on the other page were from the gene keys. But again, really leaning into this, right? And knowing, like, in the way that you share, if you have a first, second, or third line, like you might want to share more things about your personal process, right, in your marketing. Again, whereas if it's transpersonal, it's like you're starting to share things that are sort of reaching out, right? How am I going to interpret my way of communication with 32.2 in my conscious? So just think of the 2 and the 4. I'm going to have a modest and ongoing communication. Yeah, just don't worry about the gate. Don't worry about the gate, just worry about the line. You know, so having a second line Mercury and a fourth line Mercury. Because yeah, like I was saying, once you get into the gates, it's too specific. Your message is far more encompassing than that, right? You can contemplate it and it might like awaken something in you. You might want to listen to the gene keys of the gates of your Mercury and see what that stirs in you. But we never want to mentally engineer like what you're talking about or how you're expressing yourself based on the gates, right? Because it literally just becomes mental fuckery then, right? It literally becomes like an intellectualized process. So we're just bringing awareness to these kinds of traits. And in all honesty, I find the lines way more impactful for people to lean into with this. So again, leaning into that, right? Then maybe thinking about like what you're sharing, you know, especially I find like with the first and the second lines and the third lines, like getting comfortable sharing more of your personal life, personal experience, what's going on behind the scenes, what are you actually moving through? Like it's definitely something to stretch into. And like I said, it can be really, really magnetic, like when you do, right? People kind of want that from you. So yeah, first line, leaning into your role as the authority. Second line, leaning into your role as the natural. Third line, leaning into your role as the alchemist. Or you could lean into your role of the anarchist as well. Like the third line is the anarchist, whatever word vibes for you. Or the fourth line, the role of the connector. The fifth line, the practical problem solver, and then the sixth line, the Buddha or the role model. Beautiful. Now I wanted to leave a little bit of space for questions. So let me stop the share. And if you have questions, you can pop them into the chat. I can't see any of your faces, which I don't love. Yeah, let me know. How did that feel? Are there any like signs that were maybe in your chart a surprise for you, or the lines that were a surprise for you? And also just know that like everything I applied to with the lines, apply that to your profile too, right? You can apply those roles to your profile. And it's always just, again, the combination of it all just kind of emerging through you. Jane, the line 2 of my unconscious is a surprise for me as a 4/6. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So that's just something to think about, that naturalness, right? How can you use earth and fire element in your content creation process? So earth would be all about what's tangible, right? So you might want to focus on with your messaging, like if you're a service provider, how does this, what tangible results does this provide for people? You might even want to talk about, you know, it's not misaligned to talk about like financial results and things like that, right? Mercury and earth is all about like, what was the material change that happened here? Talking about things to do with values can be really important, but the material kind of quality, and also like sharing in a way, like you want to make sure that you feel really grounded too in what you're sharing as well. Oh, hi Priya. I didn't know you were here. And then the fire element is all about the desires, right? And creating inspiration for people, letting people feel like the gumption that you have, letting people feel like even like the fiery or the peppery kind of ideas that you have. And I mean, it depends on which sign it is as well, I think a little bit, but yeah, letting people feel your passion too is a big one with a Mercury and fire sign. So Priya, Sagittarius second line in my, you're so Mercury Sagittarius, feels really empowering. Pisces fourth line is really familiar. Yeah, the Pisces is big for you. Exploring how to bring that Sag second line into my brand and voice. Yeah, so to me, Sag second line is like the natural philosophical way about you, right? And the natural kind of connection that you have to wisdom and knowledge and higher truth and seeking, you know, and really using your voice and your messaging maybe to open people up to new perspectives, to broad, you know, Sagittarius is all about how do we broaden people's horizons, right? We take them from this and open them up to this. And it can be very, Sagittarius is like, it can be very motivational and very like motivational in regards to like motivating people to make change and motivating people to get unstuck and motivating people to like actually go out and see the world. We've got one in Leo, line 4. Can this be used to create offers? So this is kind of what I've been talking about. We don't want to like mentally create offers based on these things, right? I think when it comes to your offers and your work, it's really important that that's led by your body and your authority, right? And I think the offers that are most aligned for you will come through that. So that's all you want to be mindful of. Like we can be curious about these things and you might find like you have a response to something, right? And then you're creating an offer, but we don't want to like mentally look at your chart and say, okay, you're a Leo with a line 4, you should create a membership for creativity or something. Like that would be a very literal interpretation of that, right? Let's create a network and a membership that's focused around Leo themes, which is creative. Like that's too literal, right? But what you would want to focus on is sharing your creativity, right? And fostering connection, fostering a sense of like warmth within your community, right? And sharing you as the creative, as the illuminator. I think Leo fourth line to me feels like a very generous, like you could position yourself in a way that where you're very generously sharing other people. Maybe you spotlight people in your community, right? You create ways to help other people be found, because the biggest, you know, with both of those energies, right? Like Leo and the fourth line, like the more the people around you shine and sparkle, the more you will as well. Aries in the gate of shock. The gate of shock is cool for your Mercury. You know, I always think with that gate, like you have the capacity to really like understand those sorts of bigger life events, and you can potentially really walk with and guide other people. You might have something to share about how those events have impacted you as well, Astrid. Pisces in line 2. Yeah, so your unconscious won't, you know, if you're brand new to looking at your unconscious chart, it doesn't always feel super affirming, right? So all we're doing is kind of shining a spotlight on this and letting it, what will happen is, you know, all of those unconscious placements, the more you kind of decondition and you live your strategy and authority, and the more you're in your design, the more those parts of you become more obvious to yourself. They're usually quite obvious to other people, though. Yeah, so like I was saying, so Adele, just don't get too caught up on the gates. Just lean into what we've talked about with the elements and the signs. So Aries, passion, motivation, desires, self-actualization. What do I want? Leo, creativity, illumination. How do I help you shine brightly? And what do I, and also like Leo is like, what do I want to create for me too, right? Like creativity, sharing your creativity that's kind of just for you. And then leaning into the 4 and the 2. So the connector and the natural. Yeah, it shouldn't feel forced, right? Like that's the whole thing of like exactly what I'm saying. Like, don't let this become a mental process. Like, look at this as an opportunity to illuminate different parts of your chart. We never want to force offers or communication or expression because it just won't resonate. Like people will feel that it's not authentically kind of moving through you, right? So this is everything we do in human design, right? When we're looking at different parts of our chart, we're literally just educating our personality on our chart. You know, we're educating the personality, we bring more awareness to it, and naturally we start to kind of unlock those different parts of us. Andrea resonated with her line 3s. Yeah, I think it just, when you have your unconscious and conscious in the same line, it just kind of reinforces that energy for you, right? So rather than having kind of a little bit of the like movement and fluidity between the two, it's like you've got that double 3, so it's just a little bit more significant. This 4th line. So you don't really have to necessarily balance them. Like you'll live out, you know, all of your chart, right? Like the more correct you become, you don't have to consciously kind of balance it. I get, you say you struggle with the projections, Karina. Yeah, I know what that feels like. I think, you know, with a 5th line Mercury, you know, the projections are mostly applicable when it's your profile, right? But just, you know, the big thing you can do is make sure you're providing practical solutions. Like with a 5th line and 4th line, practical solutions, and connection, you know, or fostering connection, or like helping your community prosper in different ways. Like I was talking about the 4th line before, different things you can do. Yes, Catherine asked, how does it affect us when Mercury was retrograde at our time of birth? That's such a good question. Thank you, Catherine. You might find you're more comfortable when Mercury's retrograde, you know, in the transits. I have a lot of Mercury retrograde clients who have him retrograde in their birth chart. And oftentimes they find like launching things, putting new offers out, even like their creative process feels better when Mercury's retrograde in the transit. So what I suggest is just paying attention to how you feel when he's retrograde, and you can potentially kind of harness that time, right? If you know that's when you feel more at home in the energy. But typically it just thinks you can have more of an introspective quality to the way you think and process, and yeah, just kind of like a different way of expressing yourself. But it's not a bad thing to have planets retrograde at all. It's just a slightly, yeah, introspective, inverted quality of the energy. Yes, Lauren is asked, is there any impact with your Mercury being in an undefined or versus a defined center? Yeah, so you'll definitely have more connection to your Mercury if he's on a defined center, and especially if he's a part of a channel, certainly. But still the qualities, even if it's an undefined center, still feeling into these qualities can be helpful. 5th line is blowing my mind. So much to learn here. Messaging as a 4/6 splenic Mani, who's a Virgo sun, Aries moon rising. Yeah, that feels really complimentary, actually. Having a Gemini 5th line, you know, that the curious nature of the Gemini paired with like the practical solutions. And then Gemini and Virgo, you know, have like a lot in common, both being mutable signs. And Aries moon is quite complementary as a Mani too, as a splenic Mani too. No, does anything particular stand out? No, I would say what stands out for you, right? Like what pieces of this have really felt resonant for you, and just pay attention to that, because you don't need, you know, you definitely do not need anyone to tell you what to do, Sonia, as a manifester. But yeah, you might want to pay attention, like contemplate the Gemini qualities, and the 5th line qualities of like stepping into like leadership is what I would like, really positioning yourself as like the leader and the problem solver and the fixer. Okay, guys, I'm not going to be able, there's so many questions. I'm so sorry. I'm not going to be able to get through all of these. Oh, so Judith, unconscious Mercury is in Scorpio. Yes. So definitely watch the recording, Judith, But what I was saying for Mercury in Scorpio or Mercury in first lines is finding ways to incorporate like platforms or ways of like communicating and marketing and expressing yourself that give you space to share your depth, right? Because Scorpio is all about substance. And it's like you don't want to stay in the usually it can be really difficult to stay like in the shallows, and you're especially platforms like Instagram that kind of are engineered for like quick content. It can be really tricky, right? So what I suggested was like give yourself spaces to go deep, and to let people feel your depth as much as possible, right? Like don't be afraid of long form content, for example. Yeah. Anyway, I'm not going to get through the rest of these, but thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, this was so good. So lovely. Thank you all for being here. I'm sorry I can't see all of your faces. Yeah. Anyway, thank you. I hope that was helpful. If anyone's like question didn't get answered and you really want like my perspective on something, send me an Instagram DM. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Algus. Okay. Bye.